The silence in my apartment was a carefully curated thing. It was built from neat stacks of books, a single coffee mug washed and dried immediately after use, and the hum of a refrigerator that was rarely full. For 2 years, this quiet had been my sanctuary, a fortress against the noise of a life that had fallen apart. I had my job at the Vance Foundation, a low-level administrative position that paid just enough to cover rent and cheap groceries. It was predictable. It was safe. And from my small cubicle, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the world I wanted but could never inhabit, a world personified by Arthur Vance. He was the Foundation's heart and its wallet, a man whose quiet presence filled rooms far better than any loud declaration could. I knew his file, of course. 62 years old, a widower for the last decade, a fortune built on logistical technologies that were as solid and unglamorous as he was. I saw him only occasionally, during quarterly board meetings or the annual fundraising gala. Each time, my heart performed a quiet, painful lurch. He had a way of listening, a stillness that made you feel like you were the only person in the universe. His eyes, a soft gray that seemed to hold the weight of experience, would settle on a speaker, and you could almost feel the gentle gravity of his attention. My attraction to him was a secret I kept locked away, a fragile snow globe I only dared to shake in the privacy of my own mind. It felt foolish, a boy's crush on a man who was not only decades my senior and light years beyond my financial station, but who likely saw me as little more than part of the office furniture. I had a single, treasured memory, a brief conversation by the coffee machine a year ago. He had asked about the book I was reading during my lunch break. His voice was low, a warm baritone that seemed to smooth out the frayed edges of the world. He smelled of clean laundry and something faintly like old paper, a scent I'd forever associate with comfort and intelligence. I had stammered a reply, and he had simply nodded, a small, kind smile touching his lips before he moved on. I replayed those 30 seconds more times than I could count. That was the extent of it. A 30-second exchange and a series of distant observations. It was enough to feed a quiet yearning, but not enough to disrupt the careful order of my life. I had learned the hard way that disruption was dangerous. So I kept my head down, processed the donation forms, and filed the reports. I built my life on a foundation of solitude, because solitude could not betray you. Then, the disruption came, not as a storm, but as a polite, electronically delivered request. It was an email from Arthur Vance's personal assistant, appearing in my inbox on a Tuesday afternoon. Mr. Vance requests your presence in his office at 4 o'clock to discuss an urgent matter regarding the autumn gala. My breath caught. I read it 3 times, my mind racing through every possible transgression. Had I misfiled a major donor's paperwork? Was there a catastrophic error in the budget I'd helped proofread? I spent the next 2 hours in a state of low-grade panic, the silence of my cubicle suddenly feeling accusatory. At precisely 4 o'clock, I stood before the heavy oak door of his office. I smoothed my worn blazer for the 10th time and knocked. His voice, that same calm baritone, called for me to enter. The office was less an office and more a library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves of books lined 3 walls, and a large mahogany desk sat before a window overlooking the city. Arthur Vance was not at his desk. He was standing by the window, his back to me, his hands clasped behind him. He was taller than I remembered, his frame solid under a simple gray sweater. "Leo," he said, turning. The light from the window caught the silver at his temples. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Of course, Mr. Vance." I managed, my voice sounding thin. He gestured to one of the leather armchairs facing his desk. "Please, sit." I did, perching on the edge of the cushion. He moved not to the imposing chair behind the desk, but to the one beside mine, a subtle shift that immediately dismantled the expected power dynamic. He sat with a quiet economy of motion, his presence settling into the room like a steady, low hum. "I have a problem, Leo," he began, his gaze direct but not intimidating. "And I believe you might be the solution." My panic eased, replaced by a wave of confusion. He explained that the event coordinator for the autumn gala, our largest fundraiser of the year, had quit abruptly, citing a family emergency. The gala was in 3 weeks. Contracts were signed, but the 1,000 tiny, critical details that make such an event succeed were in disarray. The seating chart was a disaster, vendor logistics were unconfirmed, and the final program had yet to be designed. "I've seen your work," he continued, his eyes holding mine. "The reports you compile are immaculate. Your organizational systems for the donor database are intuitive and flawless. You notice details others miss." I've noticed he'd noticed. The words echoed in the quiet space of my mind. He'd noticed me. "I would like to offer you a temporary contract, effective immediately, to take over as the gala coordinator," he said. "The pay will be substantial, and it would be separate from your duties here, which we can delegate. You would report directly to me. We would be working closely together, primarily at my home, where the gala is being held. It is, I am aware, a significant request." My heart was hammering against my ribs. To work with him, to see him every day, to be in his home. It was a fantasy I wouldn't have even dared to construct. But the fear was there, too. Fear of failure, of being found lacking under his direct scrutiny. Fear of what this proximity would do to the careful walls I had built around my heart. "You don't have to answer now," he said, seeming to read the conflict on my face. "Take the evening. Read the contract." He slid a folder across the small table between us. "But I hope you'll consider it. I would be very grateful for your help." The way he said it, with a simple, unadorned sincerity, was what decided it for me. It wasn't a command from a billionaire benefactor. It was a request from a man who needed help. A man who had noticed me. "I'll do it," I heard myself say, the words coming out before I had time to second-guess them. A slow smile spread across his face, reaching his eyes and making them crinkle at the corners. It was like watching the sun come out from behind a cloud. "Good," he said, the word a soft note of relief. "That's very good." I walked home that evening in a daze, the heavy contract folder tucked under my arm. The silence of my apartment didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like an empty space waiting to be filled. I had said yes. I had agreed to step out of the fortress and into the orbit of the one man who could undo me completely. For the first time in years, the quiet was broken by the frantic, terrifying, and unmistakable sound of hope. The next morning, I arrived at his estate. It wasn't a mansion so much as a landmark, a sprawling stone house nestled in acres of old-growth trees, far from the city's clamor. A housekeeper with a warm, no-nonsense smile showed me to the ballroom, which was to be my headquarters for the next 3 weeks. The room was breathtaking, a cavern of polished wood floors, gilded ceilings, and towering arched windows that flooded the space with pale, autumn light. In the center of it all was a large table, already set up with a laptop, binders, and a pot of fresh coffee. Arthur was there, standing by one of the windows, a mug in his hand. He wore simple dark trousers and a soft, cream-colored sweater. He looked less like a magnate and more like a scholar in his private study. "Leo," he greeted me, his voice a calm anchor in the vastness of the room. I thought we could start by reviewing the vendor contracts, and so began our strange, shared routine. Days were spent in that ballroom, a world unto itself. We worked side by side, our tasks intertwining. I would be on the phone with the catering company, negotiating linen colors, while he would be on his own call, quietly leveraging his influence to solve a last-minute permitting issue. There was a comfortable rhythm to it, a silent dance of cooperation. I became a student of his quietude. I learned that a slight tightening of his jaw meant he was displeased with the vendor's response. I learned that when he was deep in thought, he would slowly rub his thumb over the signet ring on his right hand. I learned the sound of his breathing, a slow, steady cadence that was as calming as the ticking of a grandfather clock. My observations were constant, a running internal monologue that I couldn't switch off. I watched the way his large, capable hands handled a fragile wine glass with the same gentle precision he used on a dense legal document. I studied the fine lines etched around his eyes, lines that spoke of both laughter and loss. He was a man who had lived a full life, and I felt the profound, aching gap of my own inexperience. One afternoon, I was struggling with the seating chart, a complex puzzle of donor egos, board member rivalries, and last-minute RSVPs. I had papers spread all over the table, my frustration mounting. I must have sighed, a sound louder than I intended, because he looked up from his own work at the other end of the table. "A puzzle," he stated, his voice calm. "A nightmare," I countered, running a hand through my hair. "It's impossible. Everywhere I put Senator Collins, he's next to someone he's publicly feuding with." He rose from his chair and walked over, his presence a solid warmth beside me. He didn't lean over my shoulder, a gesture that would have felt invasive. Instead, he stood at a respectful distance, his eyes scanning the chaotic chart. He smelled faintly of the crisp autumn air from his morning walk. "What if," he said softly, pointing a long, steady finger at the chart, "we create a second head table, a smaller, more intimate one by the terrace doors, for the senator and his cohort. We frame it as a place of honor." His finger rested on the paper for a moment longer than necessary. I was acutely aware of its proximity to my own hand, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him. It was a brilliant solution, simple and elegant. I looked up at him, my gratitude and admiration a tangible thing between us. "That's perfect," I said. Our eyes met, and for a long moment, the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. His gaze was soft, assessing, and held a warmth that went beyond professional appreciation. I saw something flicker in their gray depths, something I didn't dare name. Then he blinked, and the moment was gone. He gave me a small, almost shy smile and returned to his side of the table. But the echo of that moment lingered. It was a tiny crack in the professional facade, a hint of something more personal. I spent the rest of the afternoon replaying it, analyzing the warmth in his eyes, the slight hesitation before he pulled away. It was foolish, I knew. I was an employee. He was my boss. But my heart, that traitorous organ, didn't seem to care about the distinction. A few days later, a shipment of heavy centerpiece bases arrived. The delivery men left them stacked on pallets just inside the ballroom doors. They needed to be moved and spaced out on the tables, a task that was physically demanding. I started on my own, determined to prove my competence in all things, even manual labor. I managed to get one onto a table, my arms straining. "Leo," his voice came from behind me, startling me. "Leave those. I'll call the staff to move them, it's fine," I said, a little breathlessly, already reaching for another. I can manage. My pride, foolish and thin, was at stake. He didn't argue. Instead, he walked over, rolled up the sleeves of his dark blue shirt, and picked up one of the heavy bases as if it weighed nothing. "Then we'll manage it together," he said simply. For the next hour, we worked in a shared, rhythmic silence, lifting and placing the heavy objects. We moved in sync, a team. At one point, we both reached for the same base, our hands brushing. His skin was warm and slightly rough. A jolt, small but electric, shot up my arm. I pulled my hand back as if burned. He didn't say anything, but I saw his throat work as he swallowed. When we were finished, we stood in the middle of the room, both of us breathing a little harder from the exertion. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his temples. "Thank you," I said, my voice quiet. "We're partners in this, Leo," he replied, his gaze steady. "Your success is the foundation's success. And mine." The word partners hung in the air, charged with a meaning I was sure he didn't intend, but which my heart seized upon anyway. Later that evening, as I drove back to my silent apartment, I could still feel the phantom warmth of his hand against mine. The careful walls I had built were crumbling, and I was terrified of what would be left in the rubble. But I was also, secretly, thrillingly, ready to let them fall. The work became more intense as the gala approached. We were spending 12, sometimes 14 hours a day in that ballroom. The lines between employer and employee, between our separate lives, began to blur. We fell into a domestic sort of routine. He would have coffee ready for me when I arrived in the morning. I learned he preferred it black, no sugar. I started bringing in pastries from a small bakery near my apartment. He would always eat the almond croissant I bought specifically for him, a quiet acknowledgement that made my chest ache with a strange sort of joy. We had lunch together every day, simple sandwiches and soup served in the vast, formal dining room. During these breaks, the talk would sometimes drift from gala business. He asked about my family, and I gave him the short, edited version. Parents who had moved away, no siblings, a life lived mostly in my own head. I was careful not to reveal too much, not to expose the raw edges of my past loneliness. In turn, he spoke a little about his late wife, Eleanor. He talked about her with a gentle, enduring affection that was profoundly moving. He described her passion for gardening, the way she had designed the estate's magnificent rose garden herself. He wasn't dwelling in grief. He was honoring a memory, a love that had shaped him. Listening to him, I felt a pang of envy for a woman I'd never met, for the easy intimacy they had clearly shared. It was a world away from my own fumbling, secret affections. One evening, we were working late, finalizing the program design on a large monitor. We stood side by side, our shoulders almost touching, as we debated the placement of a photograph. The scent of him, that clean, papery smell, now mixed with the faint aroma of the coffee he'd been drinking, was a constant, pleasant distraction. "I think it should be smaller," I said, pointing at the screen. "It's overwhelming the text." He leaned in closer to get a better look, his arm brushing against mine. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a wave of warmth through me. I held my breath, waiting for him to pull away. He didn't. He remained there, his focus on the screen, seemingly oblivious to the storm he was creating inside me. "You're right," he said after a moment, his voice a low rumble so close to my ear. "Much better." He straightened up, and the warmth was gone. I felt its absence like a physical loss. These small, ambiguous moments became the focal point of my existence. I would lie awake at night in my sterile apartment, dissecting every glance, every casual touch, every shared silence. I was searching for meaning, for a sign that what I was feeling wasn't entirely one-sided. I was terrified of misreading the signals, of mistaking simple kindness for something more. The power imbalance between us was a constant, sobering thought. He was a billionaire, a pillar of the community. I was a temporary contractor, a young man with nothing to his name but a fierce sense of pride and a crush that was rapidly spiraling out of control. The breakthrough, when it came, was quiet and unexpected. It was the week of the gala. A cold, persistent rain had been falling for 2 days, turning the world outside the ballroom windows a dreary gray. The caterer called with a last-minute crisis. Their primary supplier for the main course had a refrigeration failure. They had a backup, but it would be a significant extra cost. I spent an hour on the phone, trying to negotiate, my voice tight with stress. It was a problem I should have been able to solve, but my authority had its limits. Finally, defeated, I hung up. I sat at the table, my head in my hands, the weight of potential failure pressing down on me. I didn't hear Arthur approach. I only knew he was there when his hand settled on my shoulder. It wasn't a brief, professional touch. It was firm, warm, and steady. A gesture of pure comfort. "Talk to me, Leo," he said softly. I explained the situation, my voice thick with frustration. He listened patiently, his hand never leaving my shoulder. The weight of his touch was grounding, a silent reassurance that I wasn't alone in this. When I finished, he was silent for a moment. "Give me the supplier's name," he said. He took out his phone, his thumb moving deftly over the screen. He made a call. His conversation was brief, calm, and utterly decisive. I didn't hear the other end, but I heard his words. "John, it's Arthur Vance. I understand there's an issue." "No, that won't be necessary. You'll honor the original price. It will be considered a personal favor to me." "I appreciate that. Goodbye." He hung up and put the phone away. "The problem is solved," he said, as if he'd done nothing more remarkable than ask for the time. He gave my shoulder a final, gentle squeeze before removing his hand. I stared at him, stunned. He had solved in 30 seconds what I had struggled with for an hour. It was a stark reminder of the power he wielded so effortlessly. But it wasn't the power that struck me. It was the way he had used it. He hadn't reprimanded me for failing. He hadn't taken over. He had simply seen that I was in distress and had quietly, efficiently, taken the burden from me. He had protected me. Thank you," I stammered, feeling both grateful and strangely vulnerable. He looked at me, his gray eyes soft with something I couldn't quite decipher. "There is no need to thank me for taking care of my own event," he said. But his eyes said something else. They said, "There is no need to thank me for taking care of you." That evening, he insisted I stay for dinner. The rain was coming down in sheets, and he said it was foolish to drive in such weather. We ate in the kitchen, a warm, cozy space that felt like the true heart of the massive house. The housekeeper had left a pot of stew simmering on the stove. We served ourselves, sitting at a sturdy wooden table. The formality that usually existed between us seemed to dissolve in the warm, fragrant air. For a while, we ate in comfortable silence, the only sound the drumming of the rain against the window panes. Then, he looked at me, his expression serious. "Leo," he began, his voice low, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest. My actions today, with the supplier, did that feel like I was undermining you?" The question surprised me with its directness and its sensitivity. He was worried about the power dynamic. He was worried about how I perceived him. It was a moment of unexpected vulnerability. I chose my words carefully. "No," I said, meeting his gaze. It felt supportive. He seemed to relax, a subtle loosening of his shoulders. "Good," he said quietly. "That was my only intention. It is important to me that you feel like an equal in this project, that you feel you have agency." The air between us grew thick with unspoken things. He was talking about more than the gala. We both knew it. He was giving me an opening, a chance to voice the concerns that had been simmering just beneath the surface. He was creating a safe space for honesty. This is it. Now is the time. My mind screamed at me to say something, to bridge the gap, to acknowledge the current that flowed between us. But fear, a cold and familiar companion, held my tongue. What if I was wrong? What if I destroyed the fragile, beautiful thing we had built by naming it? So I just nodded. "I do," I said softly. "Thank you." He held my gaze for a moment longer, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes, before he looked down at his plate. The conversation shifted back to safer topics, but the moment lingered. He had opened a door, and I had been too afraid to walk through it. The taste of the stew turned to ash in my mouth. I had failed a test, not of competence, but of courage. The day of the gala arrived, a swirl of controlled chaos. Florists, caterers, musicians, and technicians moved through the ballroom like a well-rehearsed army. I was at the center of it all, a field marshal with a clipboard, directing the flow of activity. I was energized, focused, my anxiety channeled into a sharp, clear purpose. Arthur remained a calm, steady presence at the periphery, observing, available if needed, but trusting me to run the show. He had given me his trust, and I was determined not to let him down. By late afternoon, everything was in place. The tables were set with gleaming silver and crystal, the floral arrangements filled the air with a delicate perfume, and the lighting cast a warm, golden glow over the polished floors. It was perfect. More than perfect. It was magical. I stood in the center of the empty, silent ballroom, taking it all in. I had done this. I had taken a set of disparate, chaotic elements and woven them into something beautiful. A profound sense of pride and accomplishment washed over me. Arthur came to stand beside me. He didn't say a word for a long time, simply surveyed the room. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost reverent. "Eleanor would have loved this," he said. "You have her eye for beauty and order coming from him. There could be no higher praise." It was a deeply personal compliment, connecting me to the most important person in his life. My heart swelled, and I felt my composure begin to crack. The emotion of the past 3 weeks, the stress, the yearning, the fear, the hope, welled up inside me. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice thick. It was the first time I had used his first name. It felt both shockingly intimate and perfectly natural. He turned to look at me, and the expression on his face was one of open, unguarded tenderness. "You should go and get ready," he said softly. "The guests will be arriving soon." As the evening began, I was swept up in the whirlwind of my duties. I checked on the kitchen, smoothed over a minor issue with the valet service, and made sure the guest speakers were comfortable. I was in my element, moving through the crowd with a confidence I hadn't known I possessed. From across the room, I would occasionally catch Arthur's eye. He would be in conversation with a senator or a major donor, but his gaze would find mine, and he would give me a small, almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. We were a silent team, communicating across the crowded space with a language all our own. The tipping point came midway through the evening. I was standing near the terrace, taking a rare moment to simply breathe, when I overheard 2 of the foundation's board members speaking. They were older women, sharp and prone to gossip. "Arthur seems quite taken with his new little project manager," one of them said, her voice dripping with insinuation. "He certainly has him on a short leash," the other replied with a dry chuckle. "He's barely let the boy out of his sight for weeks." I suppose at his age, a bit of fresh-faced adoration is flattering. The words were like a physical blow, striking at the heart of all my insecurities. They saw me as a pet, an object of a lonely old man's affection. They stripped away all my hard work, my competence, and reduced me to a cliché. The pride I had felt just hours before curdled into shame. I turned to walk away, to escape their toxic whispers, and found myself face to face with Arthur. His expression was like stone, his gray eyes cold with a fury I had never seen before. He had heard every word. Without a glance in my direction, he stepped past me and approached the two women. His voice, when he spoke, was dangerously quiet, but it cut through the nearby chatter like a shard of ice. "Patricia, Margaret," he said, his tone leaving no room for pleasantries. "Leo is the sole reason this evening is the success that it is. His professionalism and talent are beyond reproach. If I ever hear you speak of him with such blatant disrespect again, you can tender your resignations from this board. Is that clear?" The women paled, stammering apologies. Arthur gave them a curt nod and turned his back on them. A final, brutal dismissal. He walked over to me, his face still tight with anger. He put a hand on my arm, his grip firm and protective. "Let's go somewhere quiet," he said, his voice low and for my ears only. He led me away from the noise of the gala, through a side door and into the hushed, empty library. The room was dark, save for a single lamp casting a pool of soft light on his desk. He closed the door behind us, shutting out the rest of the world. The silence was absolute. He turned to face me, his anger replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "Leo," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "I am so sorry that you had to hear that. That my actions have put you in a position to be spoken of that way. It's not your fault," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The shame was still coiling in my gut. Maybe they were right. Maybe that's all I was. "Isn't it?" he countered, taking a step closer. The space between us felt charged, humming with years of unspoken things. "I brought you into my home. I've kept you by my side. I have enjoyed your company more than I can say. But in doing so, I have exposed you to this, to their judgment, to their vile assumptions." He was standing so close now I could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. I could feel the heat radiating from his body. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "Do you want to know what the truth is, Leo?" he asked, his voice dropping even lower, becoming a raw, vulnerable thing. "The truth is, they're not entirely wrong. Not about me, anyway. I am taken with you. Deeply. And I am ashamed that my feelings have caused you pain." There it was. The confession I had dreamed of, delivered in a moment of crisis and regret. My mind was reeling. He felt it too. It was real. Is it just adoration to you?" I asked, the words tearing from my throat. I had to know. Am I just a flattering young face? He looked wounded by the question. He reached out, his hand hovering in the air for a moment before he gently cupped my jaw. His thumb stroked my cheek, a touch so tender it almost broke me. "No," he said, his voice thick with an intensity that vibrated through his touch. "You are the most competent, intelligent, and kindest man I have met in a very long time. You are a quiet strength. You have brought light into this house that I didn't even realize was dark. It has nothing to do with your age and everything to do with who you are." His honesty was a balm, soothing the wound the women's words had inflicted. I leaned into his touch, my eyes fluttering shut. All the fear, all the doubt, all the carefully constructed walls, they just dissolved. The gala, with all its noise and people, was a distant memory. The only reality was this room, this man, and the fragile, powerful truth hanging in the air between us. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of what came next. He had laid his heart bare. Now it was my turn. Later that night, long after the last guest had departed and the staff had cleared away the remnants of the celebration, a profound quiet settled over the house. The ballroom, so recently filled with life and music, was now a vast, shadowed space, haunted by the ghosts of laughter and conversation. I had overseen the final details of the cleanup, my mind a million miles away, replaying the scene in the library over and over again. He had confessed his feelings. He had defended me. He had touched me with a tenderness that I still felt imprinted on my skin. And I had said nothing in return. I couldn't leave. Not yet. I walked back into the ballroom, drawn by an invisible thread. I needed to stand in the space we had created together one last time. In the center of the room stood a single lectern, left behind by the event crew. It was the one from which I was supposed to give a brief welcome speech, a task that had ultimately been handled by Arthur to save time. I walked up to it, resting my hands on its smooth, cool surface. I was nervous, not about public speaking, but about the conversation I knew I still had to have with Arthur. I needed to tell him how I felt, but the words were lodged in my throat, a tangled knot of fear and desire. I decided to practice, to speak the words I needed to say out loud, even to an empty room. "Thank you for seeing me," I began, my voice a small, wavering sound in the cavernous space. "For trusting me. What you said earlier, it means more to me than you can possibly know. Because I feel the same way." The words felt inadequate, flimsy. The room seemed to swallow them whole, leaving me feeling smaller than ever. I didn't know he was there until the chandeliers began to dim. One by one, the great crystal fixtures softened, their brilliant light fading to a warm, intimate glow, like a constellation of captured stars. The shadows in the room deepened, pulling the vast space in around me, making it feel less like a ballroom and more like a private sanctuary. I turned, my heart leaping into my throat. Arthur stood by the main light panel near the entrance. He walked toward me, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of me. He reached out and gently pushed the lectern aside, the wooden legs scraping quietly against the floor. He removed the last physical barrier between us. "The room is swallowing your voice," he said, his own voice a low, gentle murmur that wrapped around me like a blanket. He stood impossibly close, a solid, warm presence in the dim light. I could feel the heat of his body, smell the lingering scent of his cologne and the clean, starched fabric of his shirt. He looked directly into my eyes, his gaze steady and profound. "Try again," he said softly. "Say it against me." My breath hitched. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation, an offer of his own body as an anchor, a sounding board, a place of safety. He was offering me his strength, so I could find my own. This is it. This is the moment. The fear is still there, a cold flutter in my stomach, but it is overshadowed by a powerful, surging wave of certainty. This is right. I take a half step forward, closing the final inch of space between us. I rest my forehead against the firm wall of his chest. I can feel the steady, rhythmic beat of his heart beneath my ear. It is the calmest, most reassuring sound I have ever heard. I close my eyes, breathing in the scent of him, and I speak. "I see you too, Arthur." I whisper, my voice muffled against the fabric of his shirt, but clear and strong. "I have been seeing you for years. From my cubicle, across rooms like this one. You are the kindest, most decent man I have ever known. Being with you these past few weeks, it has been the happiest time of my life." I feel his arms come around me, holding me securely, his hands splayed wide against my back. He holds me as if I am something precious. "What you said in the library." I continue, my voice gaining confidence with every beat of his heart against my skin. "I feel it too. All of it. I think I have for a very long time. I was just too afraid to admit it to myself, let alone to you." I finish speaking, and the silence that follows is not empty. It is full, humming with the weight of our shared confession. He doesn't speak. He just holds me, letting the truth of my words settle over us. After a long moment, I feel one of his hands move from my back to my neck, his fingers gently threading into my hair. He tilts my head back, and I open my eyes. His face is inches from mine, his expression one of overwhelming relief and a tenderness so profound it makes my eyes burn. He searches my face, his gaze lingering on my eyes, my lips, as if memorizing me. And then, slowly, deliberately, he lowers his head and kisses me. It is not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate need. It is a kiss of arrival. It is slow and deep and breathtakingly gentle. It is a question and an answer, a promise and a fulfillment, all in one. His lips are soft, warm, and they move against mine with a certainty that erases any lingering doubt. I kiss him back with all the pent-up yearning of the last 2 years, all the hope of the last 3 weeks. My hands come up to rest on his chest, feeling the solid muscle beneath his shirt, the steady thump of his heart. It feels like coming home. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, our eyes still closed. His thumbs stroke my cheeks, wiping away tears I didn't even know I had shed. "Leo," he whispers, his voice thick with emotion. The sound of my name on his lips is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. We stand there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms in the center of the dimly lit ballroom. The world outside, with its gossip and its judgment and its complications, ceases to exist. There is only the warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I am no longer alone. The fortress of my solitude had not been stormed. I had simply been given the courage to finally open the door myself. I woke the next morning to the unfamiliar sensation of soft, high thread count sheets and the gentle weight of a down comforter. Sunlight streamed through a gap in the heavy curtains of a guest room I had no memory of entering. For a moment, I was disoriented, my mind struggling to catch up. Then, the memories of the previous night rushed in. The ballroom, the dimmed chandeliers, his voice, his confession, his kiss. Especially his kiss. A wave of heat washed over me, a mixture of giddy joy and cold, creeping dread. It had happened. It was real. And now, in the stark light of morning, the implications came crashing down. What now? What were we? The chasm between our lives, which had seemed so insignificant in the magic of the ballroom, now felt miles wide. I was in his house, in his bed, a 28-year-old administrative assistant with a negative net worth. He was Arthur Vance. The old anxieties, the ones I thought had been vanquished, came creeping back. The board members' whispers echoed in my ears. Was I just a passing infatuation? A temporary solace for a lonely man? The tenderness of his kiss, the sincerity in his eyes, battled against a lifetime of ingrained insecurity. I slid out of bed, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm. I needed to leave. I needed to get back to my own small, safe space where I could think. I found my clothes from the night before, neatly folded on a valet stand. I dressed quickly, my fingers fumbling with the buttons on my shirt. I crept out of the room and down the grand, silent staircase. The house was still asleep. My plan was to slip out unnoticed, to retreat to my apartment and sort through the maelstrom in my head. But when I reached the bottom of the stairs, he was there. He was in the kitchen, the same warm, welcoming room from the rainy night. He was standing at the counter, wearing simple gray sweatpants and a black t-shirt, his back to me. He was making coffee, the rich aroma filling the air. He hadn't heard me. I could still leave. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, watching him. He moved with a quiet, unhurried grace, his actions simple and domestic. This was a side of him I hadn't seen, the man he was when the world wasn't watching. And in that moment, my fear receded, replaced by a deep, resonant ache of affection. He must have sensed my presence, because he turned. His face broke into a slow, gentle smile when he saw me. There was no awkwardness in his eyes, no regret. Only a quiet, steady warmth that immediately calmed the frantic beating of my heart. "Good morning," he said, his voice soft. "I was just making coffee. I remembered you take it with milk and 1 sugar," he remembered. Such a small detail, but it felt monumental. It was an act of care, of paying attention. I walked into the kitchen, my escape plan forgotten. "Good morning," I replied, my voice a little hoarse. He poured 2 mugs, preparing mine exactly as he'd said, and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed as I took it, and the familiar spark was there, but this time it was different. It wasn't fraught with unspoken tension. It was a simple, pleasant current of connection. He gestured to the wooden table where we had eaten dinner before. We sat down opposite each other, the morning sun slanting across the table between us. He didn't rush to speak. He simply let the comfortable silence sit with us, allowing me the space to gather my thoughts. It was another act of kindness, of his innate understanding of what I needed. He was giving me control of the conversation. Finally, I took a breath. "Arthur," I began, my eyes fixed on my mug. "About last night. Last night was the best night I have had in a decade." He interrupted gently, his sincerity undeniable. He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His touch was warm and firm. "But I imagine you have questions and concerns." I looked up, meeting his gaze. I don't know what this is," I admitted, the words tumbling out. "I don't know what happens now. I work for you. You live here. I live somewhere else entirely." In every way, he listened, his expression patient and understanding. He didn't dismiss my fears. He validated them. "You are right to feel that way," he said calmly. "The circumstances are complicated, but my feelings for you are not. They are very, very simple." He gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Leo, I want to be clear. Nothing has to change that you do not want to change. Your independence, your agency, is the most important thing to me. Last night, it doesn't create any obligation on your part. He was offering me an out, a way to walk away with no repercussions. The generosity of it, the respect he was showing me, was more seductive than any grand romantic gesture could ever be. It made me want to stay, not run. I don't want to walk away, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'm scared, so am I, he admitted, and his vulnerability was a stunning, beautiful thing. I haven't done this in a very long time. I am navigating this just as you are, but I would very much like to navigate it with you. If you'll let me. We talked for over an hour, the coffee growing cold in our mugs. We spoke with a raw honesty that was both terrifying and liberating. I told him about my fears of being seen as a gold digger, of losing myself in his much larger world. He told me about his fears of being seen as a predator, of his wealth becoming a barrier between us instead of a tool to provide comfort. We laid our insecurities on the table like cards, and in doing so, we found common ground. We agreed to take things slowly, to build something real and private, away from the prying eyes of the foundation and the city's socialites. The gala contract was finished. He insisted on paying me the full bonus, and we established a clear boundary. Our personal relationship would be entirely separate from any future professional one. He wanted to support my ambitions, he said, but not to be my employer. He wanted to be my partner. That afternoon, back in my own apartment, the silence felt different. It was no longer the silence of solitude, but the quiet of peace. The space didn't feel empty. It felt like a place of my own, a home base from which I could venture out into this new, shared world. Later that day, he texted me. It was a simple message. Thinking of you. My heart did a familiar lurch, but this time it wasn't painful. It was joyful. We began to build a life together, one quiet moment at a time. It was a life of contrasts. Some evenings we would have a simple dinner at my tiny apartment, sitting on my worn sofa and talking for hours. Other times, he would take me to the symphony, or we would walk through the gardens of his estate at sunset. He never pushed, never presumed. Every step forward was a mutual decision. He showed me his world, not as a display of wealth, but as a sharing of himself. He took me to his favorite dusty, old bookstore. He showed me the workshop where he restored antique clocks, a hobby that required immense patience and a steady hand. In turn, I showed him my world. I took him to the small, independent cinema I loved, and to the park where I went to read. He fit into my world as seamlessly as I was beginning to fit into his. The differences in our wealth and status began to feel like background noise, the context of our lives rather than the definition of our relationship. One Saturday morning, a month after the gala, I was at his house. I had stayed the night, an occurrence that was becoming more frequent, more natural. I woke up in his bed, in his arms. The initial morning after panic was a distant memory, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I watched him sleep for a few moments, the early morning light softening the lines on his face. He looked calm, content. I felt a surge of love so powerful it almost took my breath away. Later, we were in the kitchen making breakfast together. I was slicing fruit while he made pancakes. It was a scene of such simple, domestic intimacy that it felt more real, more significant, than any of the grander moments we had shared. The radio was playing softly, the sun was streaming in, and the smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air. He turned from the stove, a plate of pancakes in his hand, and he just stopped and looked at me. He had a smudge of flour on his cheek. I reached out, without thinking, and gently brushed it away with my thumb. He caught my hand, lacing his fingers with mine, and brought it to his lips, kissing my knuckles. "What?" I asked, smiling. "Nothing," he said, his voice a little thick. "Just this. This is good." It was more than good. It was everything. It was the quiet foundation I had never known I was searching for. We ate breakfast at the wooden table, our knees bumping under it. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic pronouncements. There was just the easy comfort of two people who had found their way to each other, against the odds. After we ate, we took our coffee out onto the terrace. The autumn air was crisp and cool, the trees a riot of red and gold. We stood side by side, leaning against the stone balustrade, looking out over the gardens. His arm was around my shoulders, a familiar, comforting weight. I thought back to the man I was just a few months ago, locked away in my silent apartment, nursing a secret, impossible crush. I had been so afraid of disruption, so convinced that safety lay in solitude. I had been wrong. True safety wasn't in walls. It was in the steady, reassuring presence of someone who saw you, truly saw you, and chose to stand beside you. Arthur's wealth and age, the things I had once seen as insurmountable barriers, had become part of the beautiful tapestry of who he was. His resources had given me an opportunity, but it was his character, his kindness, his respect, that had given me the courage to take it. He hadn't rescued me. He had simply created a space where I could rescue myself. He turned to me, his gray eyes clear and full of a deep, abiding affection. "Are you happy, Leo?" he asked softly. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in the crisp morning air. I thought of the empty ballroom and the weight of his gaze, the warmth of his hand, and the steady beat of his heart. I thought of the fear giving way to trust, and the silence giving way to a shared, comfortable quiet. "Yes," I said, and the word was simple and honest and absolute. I am. It was a new beginning, not a fairy tale ending. It was real, and it was ours, and it was just getting started. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.